If you have a bad boss, I really feel for you. That is such a hard position to be in. You have that gut feeling, that pit in your stomach, not just on Sunday night, but really the whole weekend. All the anxiety, the stress, just having to deal with someone who is difficult or someone who is incapable of their job. It causes so much anxiety. It is such a hard position to be in. So what are you supposed to do if you have a bad boss? Too many of us find ourselves in that position. Let's talk about it. Hey there, welcome back to the Culture Keepers podcast. I'm Kara List, your leadership coach, and we're here to discuss topics that will empower you to cultivate thriving workplace cultures where your people are happy and high performing. And you know, it's easier to think about cultivating a thriving workplace culture when you are at the top of the food chain. But so often, we as leaders and managers still report to someone in a position that is higher than us. And sometimes those people aren't the best bosses to work for. So before we jump into talking about what we should do about that, I want to give you something. This is a conflict resolution guide because as you see, as we discussed today, there are going to be things that involve conflict. Conflict comes up in the workplace, but especially when you have someone with a difficult personality, conflict exists. So how do you approach it? Even if you can't fully eliminate it, how can you at least approach it? And we often just don't know how, or we don't have the confidence to know what to do first and then the steps after that. So go ahead and grab this guide to conflict resolution. It is free and it is going to empower you to take those first steps. Go ahead and grab it in the link in the show notes or go to www.heycaralist.com/conflict. Have you ever heard the expression, or I don't even know if it's a quote, it's more like an adage, that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses? I think that is totally true. When I think about bad bosses, one comes to mind. Can you think of a famous bad boss? Michael Scott. You might hear me talk about The Office a lot on this podcast because I love The Office. And so my husband and I, we have this fun tradition. When I was pregnant, we would watch all 9 seasons of The Office during the 9-ish months of pregnancy. I've had 3 kids, so we watched it beginning to end 3 times. So I've gotten to experience a lot of the bad bossness of Michael Scott. I mean, honestly, it could provide me all the content I could ever need to produce this podcast week after week. But Michael Scott, right? You see the discontent in the office. And sure, they work for a paper company and they might not find the work in and of itself super inspirational or compelling. But what makes them hate their jobs is their boss. And in it, we find comedy because we can relate. People don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. So should you just quit? Is that the answer? Is that what you're going to say, Kara? Shouldn't I just quit my job? And my response would be not right away. And not just because it's hard. There are a lot of jobs that are hard. There are a lot of people who find themselves in hard jobs and hard situations, and they don't really have a lot of options. Like realistically, they are in a position that they cannot just leave their job. So to answer the question, should I just quit? Not right away, and not just because it's hard. So then what do you do? And you have probably heard of the phrase lead up or manage up. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what it looks like to be in a position where you've decided you're not going to quit yet, but you're going to try to do something to improve your situation. This is how we should approach it. And so since you are here and you are a leader, you understand that you do have an ability, regardless of the environment, to have a positive impact on the people around you. Let's see what it would look like to lead up. So in order to do this, you're going to have to release the expectation that you're going to be served or led. We might feel that that is a right that we deserve. Like we have a leader, we have someone who has said, yes, I will take responsibility for these people and they're doing a crappy job. And that can cause a lot of resentment. legitimate resentment. So it starts with releasing that expectation or that right that you are going to be served in this relationship. And when you look at it that way, you see your leadership as being towards a sphere of influence. I talk about this. And when you think about a sphere, right, you think it is not just in one direction. When you think about leading, you often think that you're leading down, right, to the people who you are managing or who you are supervising. But when you think about a sphere, it is everybody around you. So when you think about your ability to impact positively and your releasing of that expectation from your boss, it shifts your vantage point. So I would like you to think of that bad boss as no longer your boss, but a difficult client. Have you ever had a difficult client? Maybe you're in the kind of work where you have clients. And ultimately, when you're in that relationship, you figure out what you need to do to make it work to produce the product. I think about the show Project Runway. Project Runway is one of my favorite shows. Heidi Klum, if you're listening to this podcast, please bring it back. I love Project Runway for so many reasons. But every once in a while, they would pull a challenge on the designers. They would say, you're going to have to work with a client. This client is going to tell you what they want. And that was really hard for the designers because up until that point in the show, they're used to getting a challenge and they respond to it with their design aesthetic, right? They bring themselves to the table. Well, now suddenly there is a person who needs something from them or wants it done a certain way, and it goes against the way they would do it themselves. There's this friction, there's this conflict. And ultimately, in order for them to succeed in the project or even to win the challenge, they have to determine, what do I need to do in order to make this work? And that's how I want you to think about your bad boss. Think about them like a bad client. And your job is to figure out, what do I need to do to try to make this work so that I can be successful here, so that we as a team can be successful here, so that I can still have a positive impact on people on all sides of me relationally in this workplace environment. So how exactly do you do it? How do you lead up? I'm going to first start by saying that you have to have a foundation of understanding that you are responsible for your success regardless of the difficult personalities around you. That is grit. That is my definition of grit in the workplace. And I think about the examples of people we have that we know. You think about like Oprah Winfrey. She was a news journalist who started off at a job where she was fired because they told her that she was unfit for the work. And then look what happened. She was surrounded by difficult people, difficult circumstances, difficult personalities, oppression, right? Like so many difficult things coming at her. But she took responsibility for her success, and we all know what happened in that story. So the foundation for what I'm going to tell you, these ideas for leading up, it has to be that you are taking responsible for your success regardless of the difficult personalities you face. Okay, so number one is to identify your boss's why. Like what motivates them in their work and in their life. And there is a certain amount of this is going to be making an assumption, but if you've worked with them long enough, you can probably tell. You can probably figure out those things that motivate them. You can ask yourself those questions. You know, what are they afraid of? What do they thrive on? Like, what do I see most consistently in the way they behave? And once you can kind of narrow it down to a couple of their motivators, as far as you can tell, then you can manage your expectations. You can know what to expect and then help yourself to not be frustrated. Help yourself to not be in a lose-lose situation every single time. Here's an example. Let's say that you determine that your boss's motivator is praise. They like acknowledgement from other people. And so that might show up for you in You're having a one-on-one, a conversation, you share an idea, and then suddenly your idea is presented at a staff meeting as their idea. Raise your hand if that's actually happened to you. It probably has. Like this is a common bad boss behavior. So if you know that, first of all, let me just say, that doesn't make it okay. None of this makes their behavior okay. We just got to figure out how to function. So let's just say that you acknowledge that they are motivated by the praise, and that's one of the ways it shows up. Knowing that, you can not share any of your new ideas in a one-on-one context. Knowing their motivator, you can then kind of navigate the way you interact and the way you work to avoid being angered by that, to avoid even setting them up to be able to do that. So you share your ideas in a group setting so that they can't take them as your own. Is it a bummer you have to do it? Yeah. But your life will be a lot better if you could just acknowledge this is how it is right now. So because of that, this is what I'm going to do so I can manage my expectations, make better decisions about what I choose to do, and hopefully be a little more content in this situation in the end. Okay, so this next one, number 2, is really hard. It's just that you gotta muster that grit. 2 is to support their successes and to work in spite of their failures. So it's so counterintuitive to want to help someone who is awful be successful. That does not come naturally. But friend, nothing good comes from you trying to prove that your bad boss is a bad boss. First of all, if they are indeed that bad, everyone knows. You don't really need to be the one to say it. And often those things reveal themselves, right? Like the truth does come out in those situations. It might take some time, but people will see what is in front of them. And by you trying to prove it, it really just makes you look bad. So support their successes, but work in spite of their failures. So if you have a boss that's really unorganized and that frustrates you, they shouldn't be a boss. They're not organized, however it triggers you. Maybe offer to help. Maybe offer some suggestions for organization. Maybe step in if you're someone who's gifted at being organized and offer to help. It never hurts for you to try to help someone else be a better version of themselves, regardless. But I know that's so hard. Like that is maybe the hardest point here is that one, is to support their successes and to work in spite of their failures and to try to help them. But you know what? In the end, if that is your approach, it will never come back to hurt you. Let's just say that you do decide eventually that it's time to leave. You are going to leave having a boss that may not be self-aware of their ability, their competency to lead, but what they will be aware of is your character, because you showed up with character. And that will serve you well there, but it will serve you well as you move on. And friend, it will serve you well in life. And this leads me to number 3, and this is to care about I'm going to call it your personal brand. So often when we are under the leadership of a bad boss, we feel like we have the permission to be a bad employee. So whether that's slacking off, not showing up on time, not producing our best work, it's like, we have this attitude of, well, why should we? Like, they're not working hard. Why should I work harder? It's not like I'm trying to impress them, or they're never going to give me the time of day or the credit that I deserve. We have all these reasons that we give ourselves an excuse to be bad employees in response to our bad boss. And then on top of that, we have a natural inclination to complain. This is everybody. Everybody does this. So there is no one that is above looking to the left and to the right at their workplace and saying whatever needs to be said, whatever you feel like you need to say about your bad boss. There are places where it is healthy for you to say what you need to say about that person. But can it not be within the walls of your workplace? And I know that that is tempting. We are adults, but even adults face a level of peer pressure. When someone in the workroom at lunch is talking about the bad boss, it is easy to jump on the bandwagon because you genuinely agree, but also just because it produces this negative camaraderie, right? All of a sudden now we're united around a culture of whining and complaining. And culture keepers, hey people, gonna call it out right now. Culture keeping is your responsibility if you find yourself in a position of leadership. If you have a sphere of influence, culture keeping is your responsibility. And so you need to have the grit, the character in those moments to refrain to the best of your ability. You won't be able to do it perfectly. I am not perfect at this. No one is perfect at this. But it is doing your best to remember that you have a personal brand to uphold. And why I'm calling it a personal brand is because your temptation to slack off and turn into a bad employee, your temptation to grumble and complain says way more about you than it says about your boss. What you are doing is creating a personal brand. When you leave that workplace, what do you want to be remembered by? What do you want your personal brand to be? You're the one that gets to make that call. Number 4, speak up and give an opportunity for a response. No one said you can't go to your boss and try to help them see what is happening. You never know when that might just be opening up a door that needs to happen. And it doesn't have to be, there has to be respect and wisdom involved with how you go in. And this is why that conflict resolution guide that I offered you at the beginning is going to be really helpful to you. It's because you need to really know how you walk into the room and what you expect to happen. And it might just be the first step. It might just be helping them become a little more self-aware or just being honest about how you're feeling. You do have the right to express honestly how you are feeling to your boss and then giving them an opportunity to respond. You hear about a lot of stories where people quit and their boss sits down with them and says, "Why are you leaving?" And the employee at that point, after they've said they are leaving, feels the freedom to say all the things. And sometimes, what does the boss come back with? "I wish you'd have told me. I wish I would have known." And although that's an ideal situation, it happens, and it happens a lot. And then you think, I didn't give myself the credit that I deserved in this place. I didn't give my boss maybe the credit I should have offered in the first place. And I maybe missed out on an opportunity for growth on all sides. So it just cannot hurt to open the door and give an opportunity, give a chance for your boss to respond. And friend, nothing may change, but at least you tried. And I think it's important for you to prove to yourself that you tried, rather than just keeping a door closed permanently and never knowing what would have happened if you tried to open it. So those 4 things can help. And maybe they can work, but maybe they can't. So what do you do then? What do you do in those times where you have tried, like you have put in the grit, it hasn't worked. And sometimes it won't. And we're going to talk about what you do, but here are a couple reasons why it maybe didn't work. And it doesn't have to do with your effort. You put in the effort and it still didn't work. And one is because there is a legitimate character flaw that is happening with your boss. And that character flaw is putting you in a position where you have to compromise your values. My husband had a boss once who was incredibly dishonest, like slimy, dishonest. And my husband was put in a position where he felt like he was doing dishonest work. And you just can't do that. You can't live that way. If you are being put in a position where someone is asking you to compromise your values, then that is nope, I gotta go. And those character flaws, there are people who are going through stuff and they can learn and grow. And maybe after all those 4 things, your boss does grow and change. But if there is a deep-seated level of integrity that is missing, that is going to be really hard to change and to impact and to grow. And if that's the case, or there might be other factors, the second reason it might not work is because you have exhausted your ability to make a positive impact. I was in a job position once where I felt like I gave it such a fight and I worked so hard, and I got to the point where I was And ultimately, I could look around and say, I don't think that I have the ability to make a positive impact here anymore. Like, I think I've been shut out. I think I've been turned, like they've tuned me out. And I don't think I have the ability to speak into this anymore. And so if I can't be effective here at all, then I need to go where I can be effective. And then finally, and this is so important, safety. If you are in an unsafe environment because of a bad boss, that is a get out of it situation. That is a get help situation. If it's bullying, right? If it's the way they speak to you, if it's severe misconduct, first of all, if that has happened to you, I am so sorry. What an abuse of leadership at your expense. Should never happen. I am so sorry. And if you're in a position right now where you don't feel physically, emotionally, mentally safe at work, then those things I said before are not going to work, and you're going to be potentially harmed even greater. And in that scenario, my friend, it is time to get out. So worst case scenario, leading up doesn't work. And so what do you do at that point after you have made the decision to leave? You collect the lessons you've learned. That is really all you can do. You look around and you say, there are things here that I can take with me that will help me to be a better leader. And you take the time to process it. Maybe you journal it, you write it down. Maybe you talk to a friend about those things. You collect those lessons learned. And then in wisdom, you don't jump from the frying pan to the fire. The next job you step into, make sure you have a fantastic understanding of the culture. You find ways to ask good questions. You find opportunities to network with people who know what it's like to work for that person, work for that organization, and you ask hard questions in that interview process so that you don't go from bad to worse. But friend, I do want to say leading up can work. It can work. I have seen it happen. I've been a part of it happening. It can work if you choose to be gritty and go for it. So just to review, here are the 4 ways you can lead or manage up. Number 1, identify their why. 2, support their successes and work in spite of their failures. 3, care about your personal brand. And 4, speak up and give the opportunity for a response. And friend, doing these things, you can have peace, right? You can take heart that you have done everything you can. And regardless of what happens next, you have done your best and you have preserved your character and you've continued to make a positive impact. And that is all you can do. So now that we've had that conversation, next week, I'm going to lead a discussion on how to make sure you're not a bad boss, because what if it's you? Ooh, yikes. I don't think it is. But we're going to talk about avoiding being a bad boss. So if you have gained some insights from this, if there have been some major takeaways for you, I would love it if you would let me know. Go ahead and leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or go ahead and leave me a review, a nice rating in your podcast platform. That would be awesome. And friends, I'm here cheering you on. Leadership is it's so hard, but it is so rewarding. And I'm so inspired by you, the people who step up and say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be a leader. So hang in there. Let's talk next week.